I really worry about the gap because I think there will be a proliferation of jobs at that entry management level. But then our graduates have a chasm to jump across. We won't have that traditional landing place where they get their first job. So I think in many industries, we're going to have to rethink what the preparation for those industries looks like when we've got to help them leap that gap.
Welcome to Radical Cooperation. I'm Dr. Michael Horowitz, Chancellor of the Community Solution Education System. AI is changing the workforce, but is higher ed preparing students fast enough to thrive in it? As artificial intelligence reshapes industries and redefines the nature of work, colleges and universities face a critical challenge: integrating AI literacy across disciplines. This isn't just a tech issue, it's a curriculum issue, a leadership issue, and a cultural issue. So today's conversation will explore what it will take for higher education to lead in the AI economy rather than lag behind. Dale, welcome to Radical Cooperation.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to be with you. This has been a topic that's been front of mind for a lot of people, and it's a big topic. So it's great to have an opportunity to talk about a little bit and see what we can do to help people understand just a little bit more about the role of higher education in all of this.
So you have a lot of experience relative to most of higher ed right now. What do you consider to be the core components of AI literacy for today's students?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big one. AI is such a broad topic that it's a little bit like talking about electricity. And so we have to make some assumptions, but if we're with all of the generative AI work and these powerful tools in the hands of students and faculty, I think there are 4 things we might think of as core components of AI literacy. One is an understanding of AI and data. So understanding what the basic mechanics of what's going on in a large language model and what the various application features are doing with your data. I think that level of understanding is a critical part of the foundation of being able to use these tools responsibly. I'll say a couple of things that people might not think about. Critical thinking, in the most traditional of senses, is one of the critical elements, I think, of AI literacy that we need to pay careful attention to. And right alongside that is ethics and a sense of responsible use. Can doesn't mean should. And we are going to be able to do a lot of things with AI that I think we're going to need to decide not to do in order to facilitate human interaction and learning in effective ways. And then the last thing I'll mention is a human-centric approach. I think having an understanding of how AI augments capacity, but it doesn't replace human connection and human development. And I think those concepts are going to become more important than ever as these tools are integrated into more parts of our lives.
That's great. In our system, we have a lot of graduate programs that are both human-centric and embracing technology, and we aspire to be high-tech and high-touch. Let me ask you, though, what you just described, is the term interpretability fair to insert there in terms of understanding the mechanics of the large language models?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things about these systems is that they take what you give them, and then there are several layers of translation where the system is repositioning what you've given it in a prompt and sending that from a technical sense to go to the large language model. And then there's an application layer that quite often is filtering to control for inappropriate use. But that whole journey means that we don't have a lot of transparency in terms of what has happened. And so the more technical and the more critical your process is, this interpretability and or explainability becomes a fairly critical component. And there's a lot of pressure on the developers of these systems to improve the explainability of these systems so that we can peek, behind the curtain a little bit and understand what's going on, so that we're not required to purely trust the output because we can see how it got to the conclusions that it came to.
So I want to use a example from yesterday with my daughter. She's going to fly on Southwest Airlines. They just changed their baggage policy, as you may have heard. And so we wanted to ask ChatGPT about the nuance of when the ticket was booked, and we put in a query. And the first answer was, on the face of it, wrong and old. It said, well, this is a distinctive aspect of Southwest Airlines, free bags. Then when we said, no, you got it wrong, last week they shifted the policy. ChatGPT shifted and said, oh, yes, you're right. Thank you for that. They shifted on May 28th, or something like that. And, here's how it is today. So what do we make of that? Because, I think about students and faculty and staff that aren't going to probe, leading with that incorrect answer.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more important things to understand how the data works within these systems. And if you're going to be able to explain or interpret it, you need to understand that these systems have a window of time where their training data has been used, and very few of these systems are completely up to date in their training data. Now, their training data informs their general knowledge, but these systems also have the ability to search in some cases. So if you can augment the training data, the general knowledge, with active search, or even giving it go to the Southwest page and select all of the big long article that explains the details of the changes that you're talking about, and then go and paste that into ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using, and then have a conversation. If you can constrain and provide explicitly additional information, then it will do a much better job of giving you relevant data. Now, that sounds like you're doing the job for the application, and to some extent, that's what you need to do in order to make sure that it's referencing the information that's going to be helpful to you.
That's really good and simple. And I bet that 99% of users don't get that. So in effect, when it was giving me the old stuff, that's the training data, then I reprompt it because I have the paid subscription and can do it, and it's going out and getting real-time information. And would that in effect be me adding to its training data?
At that point, it's not, especially if you're using a commercial system. You've probably asked it not to use your interactions to train its models. If people are using the free version, then it is using that data to then inform how it's using, how it trains for future questions. But that really has an impact. It's one thing that's often misunderstood. If I'm using version 2 and it's collecting my data, that data is going to be used to train the general knowledge of version 3. And so it's not learning in real time yet. And I think that many of these systems aspire to have always on, always developing kind of training model, but there are trade-offs with privacy and
Right.
the concerns people have.
Is it learning about me so that if I continue discussing a Southwest Airlines baggage policy, it will then rely on its updated answer to me?
So some of the more current systems, these flagship systems, have the beginnings of a memory function where it is, but what it's doing is it's still referring to its general knowledge, which doesn't change. and it's building a local reference from your prompts. It's looking at the things that you're saying to try and remember things that are relevant about you. And even more recently, they're actually actively scanning your chat history. If you've got that activated, you can turn all of these things off, but none of that is informing the actual model that's behind the scenes. It's just an application layer that helps it to have that additional context, in this case, your past conversations, to modify and hopefully customize the answers that it's giving.
So from that relatively simple example, and we have now 2 medical schools within our system. One will enroll students next year, and one has 3 years of students. They have a lot of embrace of AI, and it seems to me medicine is sort of charging ahead. And we've heard these things about hallucinations, particularly when hospitals or clinics have tried to apply, in many cases it's serving well, and then just factually incorrect information is ascribed to a case, which sounds a little different than what we just discussed, or is it?
It is different. Again, if you think about the general knowledge that the system has, that's informed by a very broad array of information that it received from the internet effectively. And so for specialized topics, it will have patterns that it follows, but not always accurate data. And when it's following a pattern, and in its pattern, here's a citation to a research study, but it doesn't have access to an actual research study, it will quite often fill in using the pattern. It will look like a actual citation, but it will be completely fabricated. And so it's just as confident when it's wrong as it is when it's right. And that's something that makes AI literacy critical, so that you understand how to constrain it in the first place to increase the possibilities of more accurate information, and then how to evaluate the input and quickly fact check for things that are critical. I'll probably talk about it in different ways, but one of the rules of thumb is AI is a much better supporter of process than a producer of product. Now, it will produce product, and that's how we all start using it. But if you're pushing a button, asking a question, getting an answer, and then hoping to use that answer as a product, that's probably the lowest form of interacting with AI. But if you leverage it to support a process, and you're helping it to inform your research, not conduct the research, not finalize your research, but to inform your activity, that process support is something that it can be very good at doing.
Well, I'd love for you to expand that. I feel, again, like you're giving us some great basic explanation. So give us an example, please, of supporting a process.
Yeah, I think most of the time when we start using these systems, all we can do is what we're familiar with. And what most people are familiar with is Google and web search. And so when we come to this prompt that looks very much like a search prompt, we're conditioned to look for information, and we're looking for an answer. We're asking a question and seeking an answer. And again, I think that that's a completely natural and a completely valid way to use these systems, but it's only scratching the surface, because it's really when I understand that I need to constrain a conversation, for example, in order to have a more reliable output. But I may not completely understand even the constraints. And so I might say, I'm working on a lesson to teach faculty how to understand the basics of how the licensing for AI systems works. And what I would like to do is I would like to use some economic theory in order to frame my discussion. But I'm not an economist. I can say, what are 3 leading economic theories that I might use to frame my discussion about the economics of AI? And it will give me 3 options. I can quickly fact check those to make sure that they're valid. and it may say that it's Baker's 5 principles of XYZ. Now I can use that and say, using Baker's 5 principles of XYZ, help me develop a 30-minute presentation to help faculty understand what I'm trying to accomplish. That's going to be a much more rich and targeted kind of outcome than if I just say, give me a 30-minute lesson plan.
Right. So iterative process, you're kind of thinking along with it. I remember listening actually to the book of Ethan Malik and also hearing him on a podcast. And he talked at least earlier this year about using it as an intern, and you sort of check at every step. Okay, that's very helpful. So universities maybe are thinking too narrowly about AI readiness and not explaining these broader ways of interacting. Is it what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the way I would characterize it is that most universities are at the beginning of a vast scale of possible ways of interacting with these systems. And so if we stay there, then yes, it's too narrow. But we have to go through the beginning to get to the end. And I'm a big fan of educational technology adoption model from a researcher named Ruben Puentedura. And it's called the SAMR model, SAMR. And it stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And it deals with how we integrate technology. And this specifically, he's referring to how technology is implemented into teaching and learning. But you can apply this in a much broader sense. So if we think about how universities are approaching this, we're almost all at the substitution stage, which is the very first step. We're taking the AI and we're plugging it into processes that we're already familiar with. And we're using it to check our grammar and help with our writing. We're using it like a modified search engine. And so that is the first in these developmental stages. So you need to go through that to get your mind wrapped around the affordances of the tool and the capabilities. Once you've got that, you move on to augmentation. And in augmentation, you're using the AI more for process support, as we were talking about. You're using it for automation to do a sequence of tasks and to provide materials for you. So you're now doing something that's augmenting what you were able to do before. Move on to modification, and you've got AI that can act as research agents, for example. And you can do collaborative AI projects that are much more robust. And now you're actually modifying the activity that you were engaging in. It's making it into a different task altogether. And then the final level is redefinition. And this is where like Ethan Malik's idea of co-intelligence comes into play. And we're training and utilizing and improving AI systems. We're leveraging local data and we're working on shared big problems. And that concept of working alongside the AI, the technology isn't there yet to fully realize that vision. But by the time it is ready, which will be sooner than later, we need to be ready. We need to have the mindsets and the skill sets that are appropriate to be able to use AI in these more advanced ways. And I think, so looping back to the question, I think if we stay where we are today, then it's too narrow. But I think that if we acknowledge that this is just the first step and we need to collectively work on the progression, then we're well positioned to keep going on the path.
Where do you think this broad explanation, this model belongs in the undergraduate or graduate curriculum?
That's a good question, because now we're talking about some fairly complex interactions. You've got the faculty level of comfort and the faculty level of skill in applying these tools. And then you've also got the student level of comfort and the skill sets. Now, students are using these tools at a higher percentage than faculty, but there still are, approaching 20+% of students who aren't using these tools on a regular basis either. And so I think in order to acknowledge that there's a progression of more sophisticated use, that use is impossible without access. And so one of the more fundamental aspects of embedding it into the curriculum is providing access for as broad a constituency as we can manage to safe and reliable tools. And we also need to support them in this progression, help them understand how to use it in responsible ways up front, and then continue to provide opportunities to integrate. I think rethinking the curriculum is going to be it is a daunting task, especially because we really need to focus on assessments and how we do in-class assessment of learning. And those are some of the things that we've transitioned to a lot of online quizzes and tests. After the pandemic, that became a fairly common thing throughout all types of courses. And those tend to be the most susceptible to misuse of these technologies by students who might be trying to shortcut. But without guidelines, they're just sort of floundering, trying to figure out how to use them in a responsible way. So I think there's a lot we need to do to facilitate and scaffold this progression by providing support and resources and saying out loud what's important.
It almost seems like this is foundational, that you'd want freshmen or beginning graduate student to get this at the very beginning. And at our Pacific Oaks College, we have both a preschool and we educate teachers. And it seems like this will have to fit in at every level of education going forward if we're to use it well.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the gateway starting conversations, the 101 kinds of conversations that lay the groundwork. And then we're also going to need to fold it into everything that we do, so that we're leveraging these tools in increasingly sophisticated ways as they make their way through their learning experience.
What are your thoughts about the specialized systems that are out there? I know in healthcare, there's one called Glass Health that says it's only going to pull from, reputable medical journals, et cetera. And I imagine they're all sort of specialty products coming out. And then there are the fans of the, general systems that say, well, if I get adept, I don't need that specific system.
Yeah, I think that the part of what's happening in this diversification is that we're seeing an array of specialized tools that can be sort of combined together in a workflow. The biggest challenge with that is nearly every one of these tools wants $20 per month per user. And if you have, too many tools in your workflow, you're not going to be able to afford it anymore. And, but I do think these specialized systems, returning to what we were saying about the general knowledge within these systems, I think that the specialized knowledge that these boutique systems are trained on provides a much higher level of accuracy. Now, you can't just trust every application equally. There are some that are better developed and have better sources of information than others. To the extent we can understand what data these systems were trained on, that helps us differentiate between the value. But I think that sometimes the free and easy version is less likely to be the one that was trained on the appropriate amount and type of data. So we're likely to get more generic and less accurate answers.
So as we're talking through this entire topic, it's clear to me the professions that may be really impacted early on are the ones that are more of this high tech, high touch. I recently read that radiology was predicted to be the first specialty to go away. Mayo Clinic went all in. And in fact, they increased their workforce, I think, by 55%. And the radiologists are using it as a tool to work better and faster. There are other articles that suggest, financial analysts at a basic level, if I say, analyze the data on X company and produce a report, that seems very vulnerable to elimination. So what are your thoughts on AI, the university, and preparing for the AI economy?
Yeah, that's another really important and broad topic to consider, because there are so many inputs into it. But I think that it's helpful to realize that well, the news articles that tell you that everyone's going to be out of a job are obviously at one extreme. The news articles that tell you no one is going to lose their job are probably at the other extreme. There are these roles, and you were mentioning these data processing roles that are likely to be very susceptible to replacement. And we're right on the cusp of having tools that can act as agents and be set on a series of tasks. And when those become enough of at a cost level where it costs less than employing a human being, you'll start to see industries adopting these technologies. I think what we need to be doing is preparing our graduates for the next level. I think in some ways, becoming AI literate and job ready, we almost need to include a mini MBA for everyone so that they have a more holistic understanding of systems and processes, because they're going to need to move into roles that are actually more management-like roles and quote unquote supervising a team of these systems and directing them towards some business end. Will require a different skill set. I really worry about the gap, because I think there will be a proliferation of jobs at that entry management level, but then our graduates have a chasm to jump across, and we won't have that traditional landing place where they get their first job. So I think in many industries we're going to have to rethink what the preparation for those industries looks like when we've got to help them leap that gap.
So interestingly, I can imagine more demand for advanced education. Right. As we close out, Dale, if there's one mindset shift or recommendation for higher ed leaders looking to prepare their institution for AI, what would it be?
Yeah, I think generally it is this idea of partnering with the AI, learning where you can trust it and where you can't, and then adopting the mindset, whether you're looking at an intern-like metaphor, like Ethan Mollick suggests, or some other idea of how these systems are working on your behalf. That mindset will allow you to embark on strategies and techniques that are going to realize far more benefit than when we're stuck at a transactional, push the button, get the product kind of mindset. And so I really think that that broader approach and looking towards the day when we'll be partnering with these systems is the pathway that's going to be the most productive.
And implicit in that, I suppose, is that we should all be making use of it and get conversant and not have this kind of magic attitude and be either afraid or diving in blindly.
Right. I think there is no substitute for hands-on experience, and anyone who has played with these systems and utilized them for these basic tasks, you tend to have this epiphany moment after you've worked enough with them that you realize, oh, this is different than I thought before. And it's at that moment that you're ready to learn more and to step into a progression. But I think we have to have informed conversations about these things, and that's only going to happen if people have experience using them.
Well, Dale, thank you for joining us today. Your insight into how AI is transforming education and how we can respond helps chart a much needed path forward for higher ed. And I can see why Virginia Tech is fortunate to have you as part of their team. So to learn more about Dale Pike and Virginia Tech's work in digital learning, connect with him on LinkedIn. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Radical Cooperation and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Preparing for AI economy isn't optional, it's leadership. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Radical Cooperation.